And some think when we get to these points in life, and I've been there, you know what? I need to take matters into my own hand. I need an outcome. It's time for me to take control and make this thing happen. Naomi's thinking all of our problems could be done. This could be it. One theologian put it this way: I've learned two things in life. Number one, there's a God. Number two, I'm not him. The fork in the road for Orpah and Ruth made all the difference in the world. We're going to see it in just a moment. Here's the second step. She took a step of faith. She took a step of obedience. So the very first thing when they came into Bethlehem, Ruth went and gleaned wheat, gleaned grain from fields that had already been picked. Now, some of us might be thinking, where in the world does she get this idea? Well, I'm going to show you back in Leviticus 19, 9-10. I'm going to pop it up on your screen. This was a law in the Old Testament to landowners. If you're a landowner and you have grain, you go ahead and harvest it, but leave some for people who don't have much in their life. And so here's the passage. These are the commands. Speaking to landowners, when you reap the harvest of your land, do not reap to the very edges of your field or gather the gleanings of your harvest. Do not go over your vineyard a second time or pick up the grapes that have fallen. Leave them for the poor and the foreigner. I am the Lord your God. So, boy, here's probably the best picture I could put together for this. Imagine that you went to an old country buffet or Golden Corral. I know we have Golden Corrals around here. So you go there, but you're not an employee and you're not a customer. Rather, you look for the tray that gets passed by when people leave their table and you see that there's maybe a little bit more meat on the chicken bone, or there's a half a meatball, or there's a little portion of mashed potato, and you go ahead and you take that, and you know that everyone in the whole restaurant is looking at you like, what in the world is going on? That's gleaning, people. That's humbling. There's nothing dignifying about what Ruth went and did. But it was obedience. So follow this. It was obedience for her to do according to God's word. Your God will be my God, and what he said I should do, that I'm going to do it. And some think when we get to these points in life, and I've been there, you know what? I need to take matters into my own hand. I need an outcome. It's time for me to take control and make this thing happen. But for Ruth, it was just a step of obedience that she took. She didn't start focusing on the outcome that she wanted. She took a step of obedience to God. The Bible says I can pick up grain in a field. I'm going to pick up grain in a field, and I'm going to do it with all that I have. Now, it reminds me of a verse I learned as a little kid. Maybe some of you know this verse. I want them to pop it up on the screen behind me. This verse is exactly what we're talking about. It's Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. Would you say this with me? It says, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways, submit to him, and he will make your paths. So you see, this is exactly what happened here. Ruth took a step of obedience. I'm going to trust the Lord. I'm not going to be outcome-based. This is what I want to have happen, and I'm going to make it happen. She says, you know what? I'm going to trust in the Lord with all my heart and let him direct my paths. So she took a step of obedience, and wait until you see what God did. So here's where I'm going to move through really quick. So Ruth comes through the door after gleaning in the field all day, and there's mother-in-law sitting there, and Naomi says to Ruth, so where did you go today? And Ruth just says, well, I was in the field of this guy named Boaz. Well, instantly, Naomi, Boaz? She says, Boaz, he's a close relative. He's a kinsman redeemer. Now, I know when I just said that, that may not click in our culture, a kinsman redeemer. A kinsman redeemer was a near relative who was legally positioned to purchase the land, the estate, or marry the spouse of a predeceased relative. And so this was a biblical way that a close relative could come in and take up what was lost from the relative passing and continue to move that lineage and estate and land forward. And so this was exciting. Naomi's thinking all of our problems could be done. This could be it. Boaz is a kinsman redeemer. So Naomi devised a plan, like all good mother-in-laws do. Ruth, you need to go tell Boaz. Tell Boaz that he's the kinsman redeemer. And so they devised it. Ruth went over to him and said, Boaz, you are kinsman redeemer to me and my family. Now here's the crazy thing. Boaz already knew. So I can't make a theology out of this, okay? It's not a sermon point, but you know what this tells us? Boaz was checking out Ruth. And he did some snooping on her, if you can believe it, without Facebook, without Instagram, without social media. And he figured out the scoop. That yes, I could be your kinsman redeemer, but he also found out one other thing. There's someone who's a closer relative than him who would be actually first in line. So Boaz says, okay, Ruth, you go back home. You tell your mother-in-law what's going on. I'm going to go to this closer relative, and I'm going to see if he wants to be the kinsman redeemer for your family. And if he doesn't, he says, count me in as sure as the Lord lives. So she goes back to home. He goes to this relative and he says, you know what? There is someone who you could redeem them and their family and their land. And he says, well, you know, the land appeals to me. He said, but I have too much at stake with my family, my inheritance, what I have going on. And he says, I'm not going to step into that position. And so Boaz left there that day with a whole new property and a whole new lady linked on his arm. So Ruth went from widow to wife to mother. Her empty home, her empty heart, her empty womb are now full. So let me read this. There's verse 13 in chapter 4 where it's all summed up. It says, so Boaz took Ruth, she became his wife. When he had made love to her, the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. That's the whole thing. 15 words in the Hebrew language summed up the whole end of the story. Some people wonder, they don't know exactly who wrote the book of Ruth. Well, I can tell you right now, it is a man. And here's how I know. Because only a man can talk about his wedding and his pregnancy and birth in 15 words or less. So there it was. After nearly a decade of infertility, after gleaning in the fields humbly as a widow, she's now a wife and a mom. And her son's name was Obed, which means servant. So she went from widow to wife to mother. Naomi, mother-in-law, went from bitter to bountiful. So here's the part I didn't tell you about. When Naomi came back to Bethlehem from Moab, there's her friends who come out, oh, Naomi. And she says, don't call me Naomi, because Naomi means pleasant. Call me Mara, which means bitter. It says, because the Lord has dealt harshly with me. I went away full, but I came back empty, she said. Well, here's the thing. She came back empty, but now Naomi's arms are once again full. At verse 16 of chapter 4 says, then Naomi took the child in her arms and cared for him. Can you imagine this after all those years? And all the women living there said, Naomi has a son. And they named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. And just like last week with Rahab, not only did it end with King David, it continued to move on. And like with Rahab the prostitute being in the lineage of the Messiah, Ruth was also in the lineage of the Messiah. So here we go. Here's where we wanted to get. I have two things that, friends, we need to see today. We need to embrace these two things today. And here's the big theme. God makes beauty out of broken dreams. What seemed crushed and shattered, never to be put back together, God reassembles the pieces so he can create a beautiful mosaic that everyone values and appreciates. He does things with our brokenness that only he can do. One theologian put it this way: I've learned two things in life. Number one, there's a God. Number two, I'm not him. God can do crazy, amazing things with our broken dreams. And if our dreams break, it's normally because God has bigger dreams he wants to accomplish in our life. So here's two reminders to take home today. So let's pack these deep in our heart. I need them right now. You will need them either now or you're going to need them in the future. So here they are. Reminders to take home today. Number one, focus on obedience, not outcome. Focus on obedience, not outcome. Remember that bookmark. Here we are right now. There was a fork in the road for Orpah and for Ruth. And often, like Orpah and Ruth, and even Naomi, we think about the outcome. What do I need to get? We often don't think initially of the obedience, but we think of the fast track to success. And often we can shortchange ourselves of what truly is best. So just imagine the life trajectory that could happen when we come to a fork in the road of a broken dream and we think about the outcome rather than obedience. Like imagine people that say the outcome, I just want to be accepted by everyone. Can you imagine the different trajectory if you're not focused on obedience? I want to get a man, or I want to get a woman, or I want to have a child. Imagine the different trajectory that can happen if we're focused only on outcome and not on obedience. I want more recognition. Here's the big one. I just want to be happy. Or the young person, I want to be on my own. I want to do what I want to do. I want to make my own decisions. And you heard about the teenage boy that said that, I want to be on my own, do what I want, make my own decisions, and so he left home and joined the army. You'll get that one later. Can I just say, life goes sideways very quickly when we focus on outcomes to the diminishing of obedience. So Orpah took the logical best path. It made sense. This is my quickest way to provision, a man and a child. Ruth took the road of uncertainty that was filled with improbabilities and obstacles, but it was the road of faith and the road of obedience. And let me tell you, there could not be a different trajectory. So here's the bookmark. When I looked up Orpah, because the Bible doesn't say anything